So I come from a pretty low income background. My dad was a bartender and my mom was a teacher, and they had 4 kids, one of which had medical disabilities, and my father also went through his own medical stuff. So there wasn't a whole lot of excess income floating around. Despite this, now at age 26, my wife and I have a combined net worth of about $198,000. I don't say this to brag, but rather to show you that no matter what your background is, you can still be successful financially. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Tyler Warlow, and I make videos on self-improvement topics. And in today's video, I figured I would go over 5 financial tips that I wish I had known when I was younger. Even though I'm pretty well off financially right now, if I had learned these a little bit earlier, I might even be in a better place than I am now. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the video. So the first thing I'm going to say is when you are first starting to generate income, try to avoid spending more than you are earning. I know this sounds like common sense, but you'd be surprised just how many people actually end up spending all, if not more, of what they make. This was pretty common to what I did when I had my first jobs in high school. I didn't make much money back then, but I went ahead and pretty much blew most of it on getting some fast food and the video games that I wanted to play. That didn't leave a whole lot left over for saving for different things like a car or for college. Now there's a few reasons that this can set you up. Firstly, if you get into the habit early on of spending less than you're generating, that's just gonna set you up for success in the future. If you're able to do that as you build your income, you're gonna be able to save more and more money, which can go into things like your emergency fund or investments, which can then compound over time. By having that difference between how much you make and how much you are spending, you'll also give yourself a little bit of flexibility. When you are living paycheck to paycheck, it makes it really difficult to have any other options than to just work as much as you can. I recognize that there's a lot of people who don't really have a choice in this matter, but if you have the opportunity to set aside a little bit each month, try to do so, as this is going to give you opportunities in the future that you might not have had otherwise. The next thing that I highly recommend doing, especially if you're young or first starting your career, that I actually ended up doing by accident, is not having a car payment. A lot of people when they first start working think that they have to get themselves a new car. And what they don't realize about that is that it's actually a pretty decent chunk of change every month to have a car payment. You have to think about the monthly car payment that you're going to be putting towards the loan. But then there's also the cost of insurance, and not to mention any of the costs for maintenance or upkeep on the vehicle. All this can add up to several hundred or up to thousands of dollars per month just going towards your vehicle. If you have any way of getting a cheap used vehicle, I recommend doing that, especially when you first start in your career. If you are just needing to get from point A to point B, get you something that's reliable, has some mileage on it, and doesn't cost a lot of money, so that way you're not having to spend any money on a car payment. That money that otherwise would have been going towards a car payment is now going to be available for you to use in other ways, whether that is going into an emergency fund, going into some form of savings, or starting your own investing journey. Next, I wish I had known that not all forms of debt are bad. When I was younger, I was pretty much taught by my parents that all debt is bad. Unfortunately, when my father was younger, he had managed to get himself into some pretty big credit card debt that took a while to pay off, and my parents are still working on paying off their student loans. So in my household growing up, all debt was viewed as bad. You just used your debit card to pay for everything, and you only spent what you had. Now, the part of only spending what you can afford to spend is true. However, if you utilize debt in a smart and strategic way, it can actually help set you up for the future. First off, by getting yourself a limited credit card when you're young, so something like a student credit card, which is what I got, that had a limit of about $500 on it, can help you to start building your credit pretty early on. And the benefit of this is then that credit is tied to your name. It's not necessarily tied to your parents like it is if you are linked to their credit card. And this can set you up in the future because by having better credit, it can allow you to get better terms on loans. So when it does come time for you to buy a car or a house, you'll get better terms on those loans. And it can help you to get approved for things such as apartments. Having good credit demonstrates that you are a responsible person, and therefore you are rewarded by getting better deals on things such as that. So what I did was just get that student credit card that had a $500 limit, and I simply used it to get things like gas and groceries, things that I would already be buying with just my debit card, and then I would immediately pay it off so that way I wasn't building a giant balance and I knew how much was coming out of my bank account. You don't want to be using debt to buy consumer goods such as clothing and just racking up massive debt that you can't then pay off. Only use it for what you can afford to use it for. As it gets later on in your career, you can then utilize debt to help set you up in your investments by maybe getting involved in something such as real estate investing. But you should always do your own research and understand how you are utilizing the debt and the risks involved with it. You don't want to be going into it blindly and assuming that everything will work out. But I wish I had learned this earlier because I would have been setting myself up and improving my credit as early as possible, so that way I would have the best possible credit score when it came to things such as looking for my apartments or when I would have to help my wife buy a new car. The next lesson that I wish I had learned maybe a little bit earlier is make sure that you are still setting aside some money to have some fun with your life. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the mindset of you're in your 20s or you're in your teens, so you should just ball out and go hard and spend all of your money. That's not what I mean. What I mean is you should make sure that you set aside a certain amount of money that you can spend guilt-free. When I was younger, I had the mindset that you should just save as much as possible. Any money that wasn't going into an emergency savings or an investment of some form was not earning me anything. So therefore, it wasn't a good use of my money. And the more that I could put towards investing, the earlier that I could retire, and then I wouldn't have to work anymore. And I kind of stressed myself out because in the early years, it's really only going to make a couple years difference if you're maxing it out versus setting aside a couple thousand for your personal use. By setting aside more money for personal use to get things like coffee or go out with my friends, I had more enjoyment out of life in general rather than stressing constantly about the future. But I made sure that it remained in my budget, and when I ran out of the money for the month, I stopped spending. I just wish I had learned to enjoy life a little bit more earlier. And the big final lesson that I'll leave y'all with that I had to learn the hard way is when y'all finally do start investing your money, whether that's in a 401k or a Roth IRA, make sure that you are actually investing that into something. For a few years, actually, I was putting money into my Roth IRA. This started pretty much right after my first internship. But what I didn't know was that money then just sat in the account. It wasn't actually invested in anything. So the Roth IRA was essentially just acting like a fancy savings account. Once you put your money into an investment account, again, whether that's a 401k, a brokerage account, or a Roth IRA, you then have to choose something to invest it in. When you're first starting out and you're just trying to learn, I just recommend investing in low-cost index funds, as this is going to be the easiest route for people. Investing in an index fund is going to track the overall economy. And yes, there are several different types that you can choose from, like there's the S&P 500 index fund versus the total stock market index fund. But really, it's more important when you're young to just choose something to invest it in rather than waiting, because the longer that you have that money sitting in an investment, the more time that it has to compound. And the earlier that it starts compounding on itself, the earlier that you're going to start seeing those massive gains later down the road. I missed out on 2 to 3 years of investment gains that I could have been making because I didn't know that you had to do this step. That could have made an impact of 2 to 3 years off of my investments, especially because it was some of the best years in the market that we had seen. So if you're starting to get interested in investing, don't make that same mistake as me and try and get started as early as possible. But that's going to bring us to the end of this video. If you found the information in it to be helpful or informative at all, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to join me along in this self-improvement journey. If you have any of your own thoughts, ideas, or questions, please be sure to leave a comment down below. I like to read and respond to all of them. If you're interested in more videos like this where I talk about personal finance related topics, be sure to check out this video right here where I talk about the lessons that I learned from listening to over 680 episodes of a personal finance podcast. If you're more interested in my most recent stuff, be sure to check out this video right here. But until the next time, this is Tyler Warlow, signing off.